Welcome to Zorpazorp Gaming. My name's Lachlan Linton Keane and welcome to the second installment of our Pelennor Fields board. Now as you can see, it's doubled in length since you last joined me. That's right, the Rammas is now 8 foot long, which is just kind of bordering on ridiculous, but it looks absolutely awesome. In this video we are going to pick up where we left off in the first tutorial. We just finished doing all of the construction and build work of the gatehouse, so in this installment we're going to take it to completion. We're going to focus on all of the painting, all of the work that's needing to be done to get this gorgeous white stone. We've got our beautiful little blue tiled roof here, and of course getting that ground coverage down in terms of colour, and then we're going to move into probably the most important element on our Pelennor Fields board, and that is the field itself. We're going to go through all of the static grass techniques, looking at different colours, different types and styles, lengths of grass to create a really realistic looking grass, this beautiful kind of patchwork colour, tufts versus straight fibres, all the techniques that you need to know to create a really awesome looking board, because of course the Pelennor Fields, I mean, that's the most important element really. Those gorgeous shots when you've got those Rohirrim galloping across the field, churning up all the grass on their way to slashing through some Mordor dudes. That's what we want to nail, and we want to get it looking as realistic as possible. So, without further ado, let's dive into priming, and then we'll move straight into the big painting of the gatehouse.
A sword day, a red day, and the sun rises! Ride for ruin, and the world ending!
With that last layer of detail on the stonework, the final phase of construction is finished. I'm going to let the glue dry a little bit more, maybe a couple of hours, get the heat gun on there and let that road cure up. But once that's done, we're going to jump into priming. Now, I'm going to use a bit of a two-phase prime with this one. We've got so much stonework, I thought I'd kind of get a jump start on the painting process and make it a bit easier by hitting all of the stone with a nice dark grey primer. You'll notice it's not ridiculously dark because I am going to be working up to quite a white finish, getting that sort of Minas Tirith white Númenórean stone look. So that's a flat matte grey by Rust-Oleum, just their kind of grey primer, and that we're going to hit all over all of the stonework and all over the rubble, basically everywhere there's going to be stone, including the roadway. But first, I'm going to treat the ground covering, because of course this is a foam base. Yes, we've covered it with a lot of crap, but there is inevitably going to be patches of foam exposed, and normal aerosol cans like Rust-Oleum, which is a great primer, but they eat polystyrene. They literally dissolve it, extruded or aerated polystyrene. So, of course, we're going to use our classic Design Master range, which are floral spray paints. If you guys haven't seen these on the channel before, they're absolutely amazing. They do not dissolve foam, and they're fantastic for getting a nice foamy aerosol finish. It's fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two colours today, moss green and hunter green, and kind of just apply them in sort of splotches and stuff to start beginning to put the undertones in of that ground covering that our static grass is going to go on top of. I'm going to hit all of the flat panels, and I'm going to be pretty generous and not worry about getting it on the stone, so that I definitely get lots and lots of paint over all of these foam areas. And then once I've got all that down, I'll get some sort of cardboard and stuff and just mark off all of the ground, and then come in with the grey primer, and hopefully we'll have blocked most of the ground but hit all of the stonework with the grey primer. So it's going to be a pretty fun painting little exercise. I'm going to get into drying the rest of this with the heat gun, and then we'll get on priming. Alright, so the priming is finished, and I think it's come up really well. One of the huge advantages of being intelligent with your choice of prime is that you effectively knock out the base coat layer at the same time. So we've got this great grey to work from, to work up towards that nice Minas Tirith white, and a really nice kind of mottled green with splodges of brown, as you kind of saw there in the time lapse. I was sort of smashing through it with, hitting it with different colours of green and brown, and kind of sort of really bright jungle green as with a big kind of camo green unifying it all together. So that's going to be a really nice undertone. What I'm going to do now is start first with the wall. We're going to bring that all the way to completion, and then while that's drying, I'll finish the kind of highlight work that's going to go down onto the ground covering. So we've obviously got a wonderful base colour here for our stonework, and we want to work all the way up to a nice white. So essentially I'm going to hit that with 3 different stages. We're going to start first with this grey here, which in the old terms is more of like a codex grey. It's quite a nice mid-tone grey, so that'll work really nicely. Then we'll step up to a lighter grey, which is again a bit of a fortress grey in the old terms, which is quite a nice kind of lighter grey. And then I'll begin to blend that light grey with white, and then move into a pure white final highlight to knock that back as well. We'll do the exact same treatment on the stone pavement, because we want it to look like those nice white stone Minas Tirith pavement, but we might bring a little bit of a wash into that to kind of make it a bit dirtier, because it gets a bit more travelled than the wall itself. But the very first thing I'm going to do is take this grey that I have here, which is actually quite similar to the grey primer that we've used for the base coat, and I'm going to, let's have a look at that there. As you can see, it's fairly similar. So that should work quite nicely. I'm going to take a small brush and just go around to all of the little stones that didn't get hit by the primer, because I was, depending on where I was cutting it with the Aldi catalogue, they've been brown and green instead of grey. So I'll go through and pick out all those details, and then we'll jump in, load one of our smaller brushes with the first edition, the Codex Grey, and start really applying quite a nice overbrushing or a heavy dry brush to the walls, and trying to pick up a lot of the detail, a lot of the texture, leaving this dark grey in the very deepest recesses. But first, let's jump into picking out those details. So overbrushing or heavy dry brushing is a really simple technique where we just grab our makeshift palette. I'm just using the lid of the paint tin, load the brush pretty heavily, and then we take off sort of 60 to 80% of it. You don't have to get all of it off like a really fine dry brush. And then you just drag it across the surface and really hit all those raised areas, and even a lot of the flat areas as well. You kind of just want to leave the original colour in the deepest recesses, and let that really nice highlight get nice and thick. And then as we work up in our tones towards the lighter colours, we'll use a lighter and lighter style of dry brushing, so that we're applying less and less layers of paint to build up that nice graduation of colour. Now there's not a whole lot that we actually need to do to this ground layer to get it ready to take some static grass, but what we're going to do is try and tie in a few of those base colours that we've put down, our couple of greens and our big browns, and bring them all in together to kind of just give them a bit more unity. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab some burnt sienna, chuck it down on my palette. I've got a little bit in there already, and then I'm going to just do some really light dry brushing. An easy technique to get some stuff when you're working with small quantities is just take a little bit on your spatula and then just whack it onto your brush like that, and then pull all the excess off, and then put it back on, put all the excess off, and that way you don't even need to worry about going onto any paper towel or anything. And we're just going to gently apply that across, really favouring the brown areas, and then lightly taking it through the green areas as well. And essentially what that's doing is creating a kind of muddy mid-tone over that darker brown. And it helps us tie into the green as well. We don't need to do it everywhere. It's all about creating that undulating flow of colour to create a nice uneven groundwork. We don't want anything crazy uniform here. That's looking really nice. And our final stage is to add a little bit of highlight. We're going to just add some yellow ochre into this mix, and we're going to be really, really careful with this, because this stuff can really pop if we use too much of it. So I'm just going to mix it down a little bit, because it can get a little bit bright. mixing it in with that yellow ochre. Notice how I'm not really bothering to mix everything completely, because, you know, if you get like a slightly sporadic application of colour, that can look quite good. I'm also using the exact same brush that we used for our burnt sienna, which is still wet and clogged with the burnt sienna. So as I'm loading this brush with the yellow ochre, we can see that it's starting to blend in as well, and again it's just taking it off a little bit just so it's graduated, and all that does is just add a little bit of a highlight through all those brown areas to bring them up. And we're getting some really nice dirt tones mixing into the green and the brown. Essentially everywhere we put down that textured paint earlier will start to really pick up the top of those highlights. So now that I've finished my first pass of all the different stages of grey, all the way up to that final white dry brush, I'm just coming in with a really diluted brown wash, and I'm coming in and kind of putting that all in nice and thickly everywhere. Basically that's going to warm up a lot of the cool greys and kind of give us a hint of all that grime and a bit more shade and depth kind of throughout the whole stonework. And then once that dries, we'll come in and work back up again to that grey tone, and we'll have a really nice graduation of shade all through the stonework. When you're applying your wash to these vertical surfaces, sometimes you just want to kind of let it hit and sit, and then that way it catches in a lot more of the recesses, and we can let that dry, and there'll be a lot more colour there than if we just sort of, you know, wiped over it and brushed up and down. Really kind of push it in, let it sit and let it play, and it'll look much nicer. The other thing to note is, of course, this wash is just water-based, and we did assemble this entire model with PVA glue, or even though it was weld bond, essentially a PVA glue subtype, and that is a water-based glue. So one thing to kind of note here is that you need to make sure that your prime, your initial aerosol spray, is really thick and really good coverage, and that way you're not going to get any water getting into the glue and weakening the structural integrity of the building, because having our entire walls fall down would not be very fun. So yeah, coming along well though. So the main painting phase for the board is almost finished. The stone's looking fantastic, the groundwork's looking really great. Our last little task is to knock off this roof. The tiles have just been primed black, and the inner woodwork has been primed, kind of just a mission brown with an aerosol that I had. Now what I'll do with the timber is I'll just work up through that kind of burnt sienna, burnt umber range, getting lighter and lighter towards a bone tone, and to kind of dry brush those layers in. Then I'll come back through with the brown wash, the same wash that I used on the stone, and hit the whole timber to kind of knock it back and tie all the tones together, and then just come back in with one final kind of highlight dry brush with that really crisp bleach bone to bring out those kind of pine timber stylings. And then for our slate, we're just going to use essentially a few kind of really dark slate blue greys, like an old shadow grey in the old language, and kind of really brush that in, leaving a bit of the original black and a bit of the original greys there, and move lighter and lighter until it's a kind of really crisp light shadow grey, just as that final highlight, and we'll get a nice blue slate sort of tone for the roof, and then that guy will slot just in there. So with the painting finished, we get to move on to probably my favourite part of the whole process, which is applying our static grass and creating that beautiful farmland prairie look that we know and love from the Pelennor. So we're going to do that with a combination of different techniques and materials, but the first thing to kind of consider is when we're creating a nice grassland, whether it's Rohan or Gondor or Ithilien, wherever we're kind of creating, we want to have a really nice contrast ratio across the grassy field, just to kind of essentially make sure it doesn't look like a golf green. We want it to be interesting and have texture and depth, and the key to achieving that is using different sizes and different styles and colours of static grass, because everything in nature has so much natural variation, all the different kind of pigments and colours and bits of chlorophyll and all the different plants. We don't want everything to be too uniform, otherwise it just doesn't look realistic. So our main techniques or our main kind of materials are applying static grass tufts. which are these nice big kind of clumpy sections, which, you know, they're really sort of small tufts of grass or small low grassy bushes, and they give us quite a bit of height, and we sort of sporadically place them through the board, and then we'll come in with static grass fibers of various lengths, starting with our 2mm and then working up into 6mm, and I've got these tufts in 6mm and 10mm. So kind of playing with all those different features, we're going to be able to create a really nice diverse looking board, which is going to look ace. There's lots of different methods you can use to apply your static grass surfaces, whether you're layering shorter grasses on top of each other or building lots of texture portfolios with different lengths of grasses, but because I'm using a lot of tufts in this board, I actually like to put my tufts down first and then go back with my shorter static grass and work up to my taller static grasses, because the tufts kind of give me, I guess they give me a nice sort of place to start from, and then you really get to kind of play with where the tufts sit, and that kind of adds a lot of character to the board. So when we're thinking about where we're actually going to put our static grass tufts, we've got a couple of things to consider. Essentially, the length of the grass implies how frequently kind of used the area is. So around all of the kind of points of passage, like around this sort of the edge of the road and bits maybe around here where troops have been moving through the board, we'll use some shorter static grass tufts, and then we'll kind of have a little bit longer throughout. Now, luckily, because this is a field and there's not like crazy well-defined paths or anything apart from our roadway, we don't have to be too concerned. We can really mix it up and make it look really awesome. Once we've got those tufts down, we'll move into our shorter grasses and then move into our longer static grasses as well. In the films, the Pelennor is quite yellow. It's shot over at Twisel, and it's got kind of almost a semi-Rohan-y look, and we're going to kind of sit in between that and the books. Tolkien describes it as being really lush green farmland, so we're going to have a real mix of those greens and yellows and sit somewhere in that region in between, rather than completely lush green or kind of arid yellow. And to do that, we've got a really nice range of different colours. I've got my classic sort of hero spring green. We've got our patchy meadow grass, which is essentially like, this is wild meadow, I think. This is like the go-to Rohan prairie look. So combining these two together, we'll be able to create essentially a really nice color profile. And then for some lower stuff, to put a bit more shadow and kind of lower mid-tone into the greens, I guess, we've got the patchy tufts, which are a green-brown, really. They've got a bit of yellow and brown in with some darker greens. And then I've also got that color in a shorter tuft in a 6mm. Now, as you can see, I'm running pretty low on tufts, so this will probably be enough to do this board, and then we will have to pick up a whole lot more for the rest of the Pelennor, but that's okay, because that's all we're going to be doing today. So we've got plenty of tufts to work from. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of have these on standby and just start working my way across the board and really kind of having a play and having a feel with it, and just chucking tufts down anyway. So we just take our tweezers, make sure we've got a decent grip, and you can see they come straight off really easily, and then we just dunk them in the glue. We don't want to put too much glue on, so feel free to take a little bit off, because we do not want to have massive big spills of glue coming out around the sides of our tufts. There we go, and we just start to make sure that they get on there. There we go. Make sure there's no air trapped between the tuft and the glue. And we can just start to go crazy. Alright, so it's a pretty simple process. I'll throw to the time lapse now, and you can see me put down like 100 tufts. So the static grass tufts are now down, and now it's time to do the base layer of our static grasses. So what I've done here is I've made a big combination, a big mixture of all of my shorter grasses. We've got a nice brown in there to create some shadows, as well as some more jungly, darker greens, some mid-tone greens, some spring, and then some really nice bright summer green as well. So it's got like a kind of nice graduation of tone mixed through shadows, highlights, mid-tones, the works, and we're going to apply that to the whole board. These are all 2.5 and 1.5mm fibers, so they're our nice short fibers to create a nice even base layer, and then we'll build up some longer fibers in a couple of different colors as well to create a bit of texture combining with our tufts. So that's our overall color plan. In terms of application, it's an amazing, really fun and really simple process. Essentially, we'll work on sections of the board at the time until we've completed the whole board. We just grab some 100% PVA, dab it on in a little area, and then we grab a big hunk of our static grass and we chuck it into our static grass applicator, and we just turn it on and shake it on. So I'll take you through that process now. We'll start with this little corner over here. I'm using a relatively decent sized brush. so that we can get pretty quick coverage. But sometimes as you go around the tufts, you'll need a little bit more of a finer brush. But for these areas, it's pretty fine. I'm gonna cover pretty much most of it. Make sure you get nice and close up to your tufts. But occasionally, I'll leave a few little bits of ground poking through, because it's nice to see just a little bit of that exposed mud, a little bit of that exposed kind of dirt beneath the grass. So you don't want to have massive blocks of glue. That's sort of like your biggest area that you'd be looking for to have completely exposed. Usually you would apply this glue while you were doing your tufts, but I ran out of time before work this morning, so most of my tufts have dried already, and what that means is that I need to make sure I get right up close to them because they don't have any glue around them, to make sure that they blend nicely with the static grass layers. Alright, so that's our PVA down. Now we want to grab our static grass applicator and start to smash some of these fibers on there. So what I'm going to do is open the top and stash in just a big heap, just fill it up basically. Alright, so that guy's now full. We screw that back on. If you guys haven't used a static grass applicator before, feel free to check out my Rohan Edoras board. I go into it in pretty big detail, but essentially there's a battery in here. We switch it on. There's a nice bit of steel mesh here. The battery applies a charge to the fibers as they fall, so they land in the glue standing upright. Now the key thing to make sure that we've got that charge field in place is to have our kind of earth here in the glue, so that as the fibers fall, they take the charge and it completes the circuit. So we switch it on, and I like to hook it around my elbow just to give it a bit more control, and saturate this in the glue. And now we don't have to be crazy about it. They are shorter fibers, so they're not going to take, they're not going to sit up super straight or get a massive charge or anything, because they are obviously a lot shorter. But we just give it a bit of a shake, and out it comes like that, easy as you like it. Now our grass is really starting to take shape, so I'll smash through the rest of this and then we'll have a look at the finished first layer. So obviously that's a hell of a lot of static grass, but what we'll do is we'll let that dry, let the PVA dry overnight, come back in the morning and vac it all up, and then the excess will get taken away and we'll see where our original glue was and where our grass layer has built. Unfortunately that does mean that we have to wait for it overnight, but once we've got this first layer down, we can start to put in all our next layers with layering sprays and contact adhesives, which is a lot faster. So you get this first layer down, get the tufts down, you've got your groundwork, and then it really comes together quite quickly. So now what I'll do is I'll smash through the rest of the board and get this base layer down over the whole thing. So our 2mm grass has dried overnight and I have vacuumed up all the excess, and as you can see it's left a really beautiful base layer. We've got lots of our little dirt patches showing through, and it's got some really nice coverage across the whole board, which is going to be a great starting point to build our grass layers. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump in. I've got two new colours and we're going to start moving into our longer grass fibres and start applying these sporadically through the board to begin to build the colour profile of the planes. So my first colour here, this is basically my generic Rohan colour. It's that kind of greeny yellow prairie golden look. There's a bit of, it's mostly 4mm and 6mm, there's some 2mm dead winter in there, so it's quite a nice palette that's much more yellow than this kind of darker green that we've got, so that'll be a really nice contrasting colour. And then my other main colour is my generic kind of spring look. This is mostly spring and summer grasses, that it's more of an Athelian kind of tone that I use. So what we'll do is we'll bring these two in kind of basically little patches that we'll apply in layers over this green and tie them all together to get a really nice patchwork of colour, which is going to look great against this stone wall. Now we apply all of these layers in a different way. We don't use PVA, we actually use just some generic kind of spray adhesive to act as a layering spray. You can buy proper branded layering sprays, Woodland Scenic, Static Grass spray or whatever. I've always found that relatively inexpensive spray adhesive is usually fine. It varies from brand to brand. Sometimes you get the glue that like balls and gets sticky sticky, and that's not good. Just find a cheap brand that you've tested with and works well. You just got to make sure it dries clear. You don't want anything that yellows, otherwise it's going to look horrible. And we essentially just come in and spray portions of the board, and then come back in with our static grass applicator and just apply layers over the top of our grass underneath. Now, of course, everywhere we spray this stuff, grass is going to stick and stay there. So what I've done here, as you can see, is I've thrown just some spare bases over all of our grass tufts, because we don't want those changing colour. They look fantastic, so we want to protect them a little bit. I've also got a piece of cardboard that I can throw down over our cobblestone. We don't want to lose any grass sticking to the top of those flagstones. That wouldn't look particularly good. And then I've just got an old magazine here, which I'll just use for masking our stone walls as we come in. And essentially the best way to get really great results is to just work in small sections at a time. So, you know, mask whatever you don't want, hint, get all your things in place, put down a few small sprays, then come in, do a little bit of application, and just work in tiny patches with good control, and then you'll get a really nice patchwork effect across the whole board. So I'm going to chuck down a few more bases and make sure all my tufts are protected, and then jump into applying the first layer. The other thing you can do to control a bit of the colour is come in with your vacuum before the glue's actually finished and take some of the fibres back out, and that way you can have a really nice blend of areas that have it quite heavy and have it quite light. So the first layer is down, and our Rohan prairie grass is looking awesome. It was applied pretty liberally. You guys saw obviously that I was putting a lot of bases down to protect some tufts and some key areas, but it's pretty heavy in different sections, so we get this really nice kind of clumps of thicker 4mm and 6mm grass, and then going down to the 2mm, so it's looking really nice, and the color is working really nicely as a beautiful yellowy mid-tone. Now I'm going to come in with the final layer, which is going to be this much brighter green, which is still nice and tall. It's a big sort of 6mm predominant mix, so it's going to be nice and sitting high up above the 4 and 5 and the 2mm, so it's going to look pretty cool, but it is much brighter. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply it in smaller sort of patches throughout the field, as if it's like a different type of plant that has a higher concentration of chlorophyll, that's a brighter green, and that'll kind of be a highlight to the plane rather than applying it in a nice big thick solid block, and that'll really start to break it up and provide some real highlights. So let's jump into that now. Yes, that looks really nice. We've got a little patch of green here, another little patch here, another little patch here. That's fantastic. So now what we'll do is we'll just vacuum up around the edges just to get rid of some of the hard breaks from the bases that were down to protect the tufts, and then we'll move on to the next section. So originally I'd intended for those layers of greens to be the primary grassing on the board, but I've decided it looks way too uniform, and it's a bit too much like a golf green, not enough kind of realistic aesthetic for me, and also I really want to hint at, you know, what's happening in this space. We've got, it's Orc Central, basically. We've got orcs pouring through everywhere and dragging carts and trampling the grass, so I just want to create a bit more colour and variation and contrast to imply kind of dead bits of grass and more mud chewed up in different areas. So what I've done is I've gone and grabbed a few more colours to kind of slap down amongst this really nice base level green that I've got going. I've got a 6mm autumn blend, which is a really nice kind of darker green that's got bits of brown through it as well. I've got a really deep dark brown, which is the 4mm winter, so this is going to be the darkest element of the palette. And then I've got my kind of go-to Rohan prairie colour, which is the 6mm wild meadow, which I've used heaps in tufts, but I've never used it in a full loose leaf static grass before. And when that's applied, it creates really nice patches of this bright yellow, which kind of blends well with the green, but it still creates a nice kind of different tonal element. So to help really break up this big block of uniform green, I'm going to take these three colors and apply them in concentrated sections, creating a patch of green here, a patch of yellow, a patch of brown, and that'll create a really nice contrast point that can imply sort of different species of grasses, but also different conditions of grass that's sort of dead and trampled, or it's been a bit muddied and dug up by carts and orcs trampling through. And then what we do is we come in with our nice classic green mix, which is sort of that 4mm, 6mm, a little bit of 2 mixed in as well, and we come back over that and use that to tie those patches in to the rest of the board. You can do a little bit on the edges, go all the way over it, you can really play with it, and that will, if you cover it completely, it essentially becomes like a kind of undercolor beneath the green, or you can leave parts of it quite open to really hint at a different contrasty style of grass. So there's lots of fun stuff to play with. I'm going to jump in, and first I'm going to go with my brown, I think, and with the darker colors I'm going to kind of focus on hitting these depressions. Everywhere that I've got a bit of a depression in the board where more water would collect, I'll put some darker greens and then move out into lighter colors, and then on the kind of raised sections I'll put a bit of that yellow to create that really nice contrast across the undulating hills. So that's all of our patches of colour down. We've got some really nice sections of brown that are quite obvious and quite high contrast, whereas the kind of yellows that are coming across the top of the mounds here, and there's some over here as well, they're a lot more subtle, but they really add to the flavour as well. And then I've just used the Autumn blend in the 6mm, which is that real browny green, just to kind of try and tie off and start to smooth out some of the brown and yellow patches and blend them back into the green. But at the moment it's probably still a little bit too high contrast, so now what we'll do is I'll come back in with my my green mix of 6 and 4 and just blend a few of these edges off, hit all of this with spray glue and kind of blend it up a little bit and maybe a little bit over here, and then just build a few other big solid patches of green as well, just to tie the whole board in together. And then we'll jump on and do the other side. So you can really see how important that final layer is, just in tying together all the disparate elements. Before we kind of had a bit too patchy and gross sort of colorings, whereas now we've got a really nice realistic looking gaming surface that is going to be much more enjoyable to play on and much more dynamic rather than our boring little golf green. So now we'll jump on into the last half of the board, and then we're pretty close to being done, guys. With that final layer of static grass, the gatehouse is finished, and here's one I prepared earlier, and we now have 8 foot of Rammas. And doesn't this just look absolutely badass? I'm super stoked with how well the whole 8 feet has come up. I really love the whole look of the board with the stark white rubble against the kind of mottled greeny brown patchwork of the grass. I think it's come along really nice, and it's quite a striking board, really. I can't wait to see the whole thing come together. I'm really happy with, I guess, a couple of goals that I had for these boards. Number one was to really improve my static grass work. I wanted to kind of start approaching more and more levels of realism with full static grass boards, and this mottled green, brown and yellow, I think, you know, my technique there is getting better and better, and every board is looking more and more realistic, so I'm really happy with that. And the other thing that's been a big focus for the last 2 tutorials is this rubble work. Getting realistic, playable, awesome looking rubble is a big challenge, and I think we've really nailed it here. This stuff it's fantastic to play on, models can stand on it, it's really solid, not going anywhere, and it just looks absolutely badass. So I'm super stoked with how that has come together, and I'm super excited to see where the board goes from here. Obviously we've got another 4 foot going in this direction for the full 8 foot by 6 foot board. Right now I'm going to be standing in the middle of about 80 Rohan corpses. We're going to have trenches filled with LED fire, orc camps, some burnt down Gondorian farms, lots and lots of spicy elements to make what could have been a pretty boring plains kind of board very, very exciting. We've even got a few little surprises up our sleeve, but you'll have to tune into part 3 to see what those are as they unfold. Very exciting stuff. Another big thing for me on this video was to make sure I'm really nailing that level of detail that you guys are after in terms of, like, you know, the step-by-step tutorial stuff, making sure that if you're following along at home with a similar project, or hell, maybe you're building 8 foot of Rammas, I don't know, you're probably not that insane, making sure that I've got the right level of detail for you guys to be able to kind of learn and copy from all of my insane projects. So if you've got any feedback on that, leave them down in the comment section below. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I've certainly enjoyed putting it together for you. Feel free to like the video, subscribe if you're new around here, and if you want to support the channel and see more ridiculous builds just like this, jump down into the description and head on over to the Zorpazorp Patreon, and you can find out some great ways to support us there to keep us hobbying, as well as coming and hanging out with us in the Zorpazorp Discord and get some one-on-one feedback, and you can pick my brain to your heart's delight. So if you want to support the channel, jump down to the description and head over to Patreon. In the meantime, I'm going to get cracking on the rest of this board. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time here at Zorpazorp Gaming. Keep on hobbying.